Hey, my friends, this is the last chapter, chapter 14, in the building construction text. And I think it is fitting that we end with this because it's kind of why we start this course in the first place. The title of the chapter is Collapse. And why we study building construction, a variety of reasons. You know, we want to be better at our jobs. Sometimes understanding building construction helps us do a better fire attack, understand flow path. That is so is one of those things that's talked about a lot these days through structures. It helps us be better at our jobs, I guess, is kind of in generalities. But when we really get down to the real nitty gritty of it all, it's to keep ourselves safe. When we can identify the elements in a structure that are indicating collapse, or identify that this structure has that grave potential for collapse, just because of the way it's built, just because of what we know about building construction, then I'm sorry, I'm trying to get comfortable. Then we can keep ourselves safe. We can be better at our jobs by being safe. And so in this last chapter, the author talks about collapse. One of the first things that he talks about is collapse and situational awareness. Now, we hear a lot about situational awareness, and we hear it in the context a lot of times of the present, our present situation, knowing what's going on around us. Many times, of course, in the fire service, we get that tunnel vision. That's all we see. And we need to be aware of what's going on around us, but not just in the terms of right now, but what the future can hold. What is the potential from what I am seeing right now in my situation? So situational awareness helps us, I don't want to say predict the future, but that's kind of, we have to think about situational awareness in order to not be caught unaware in as the situation progresses on the scene in this emergency. Everybody has to have that heightened sense of situational awareness, all the way from that firefighter up to the incident commander. You know, as a firefighter, if you're doing interior, the incident commander's not in there. And so you have to be aware of what is going on around you. The author speaks a lot about how to anticipate a collapse. You know, sometimes when we pull up on the scene, we might can anticipate that this is going to collapse pretty soon, and we automatically go for a defensive operation. Your book lists on page 429 and 430 some of the predictors of collapse, some of the things we can see, cracks in the wall, sagging floors, leaning walls. That should be a sign, you know. Any kind of building stabilization features, braces, that kind of thing, that meant that building was ready to collapse before the fire ever occurred. And so we know that fire can only do more damage to that structure. Moaning and groaning, crackling noises of the building, movement of the building. What kind of loads does it have from the environment? Is there a heavy snow load or rain? Heavy wind conditions can also be an indicator of a potential collapse. Are there overloaded floors? What about the roof? Are there loads that are concentrated in one area or the other that can cause failure quicker? And then some of the, as I said, the existing structural instability, if there's indicators of, you know, these compromises before the fire ever starts, or maybe there's corrosion, or maybe is some bracing that would indicate that it was in disarray or in ready to collapse before the fire ever occurred. And then, of course, any kind of explosion, loss of beams due to the fire attack or the fire itself, and those other structural members that hold the building up. As those things begin to deteriorate, so do the conditions inside the building. We all know that, lightweight construction is just going to collapse. That we don't, a lot of times we don't need to see visually those things, but there are some of those there. If there's unprotected steel members that are subjected to fire, they are going to fail because of the stress that is on them. They may not burn, but they're going to fail. And then any kind of wood trusses, any kind of structures like that. Your book goes on to list a number of different types of collapses. Be familiar with those. A total collapse, a partial collapse, progressive. Oof, 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 oof. We've seen those, where it starts here a little bit and just keeps on going until it's finally all down. A secondary collapse. This is real important when we're talking about if we are doing overhaul. There's been a partial collapse of the building and we're doing overhaul, the rest of it can come down. And that has killed firefighters. So we want to make sure that we pay attention to that. Pancake collapse. I remember, I think there was a Dollar General store. This is, for some reason, this stuck in my mind from when I first came into the fire service. It was out west, like Oregon or Washington or somewhere, and firefighters were killed in a pancake collapse. The roof went poof on that store, and it was just smashed it right down. A pancake collapse, a lean-to floor collapse where the floor is still attached at one end and it falls like this. These void spaces, man, those are scary. They can be a protector for a trapped firefighter, but how long is it before it's going to be a pancake collapse? And so we have to think about those as well, about the void spaces when there is a collapse. There's a V-shaped floor collapse, a cantilever floor collapse, a lot of different kinds of collapses that your book talks about there. One of the things that's really important is establishing that collapse zone. And I really like what the book says about, it used to be said that firefighters could stay back 1/3 the height of the building. And the book calls BS on that. That you need to stay back the total height of the building because there's nothing saying you got this wall that it's not just going to do like this. It falls straight out in one piece and then it be a big problem. You have to make sure that one of the roles of the safety officer is to watch for creepers. Those firefighters that have that tunnel vision, they're doing their job, but they're slowly and surely inching forward towards the building to get a better reach, and the next thing you know, they're in that collapse zone. So we want to pay attention to that. The bottom of page 435, another Branniganism. We must learn from tragedies so that those who died have not died in vain. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. This is my self-appointed mission for the benefit of those who will listen. I get no pleasure from describing disasters. I do take pleasure in letters that say, you saved my life. So knowledge in here can save our lives. And that's what this course is all about in my mind. It's like this section of firefighter safety and survival is understanding how buildings react and how they can take our lives. There's a lot being done today with technical search and rescue, with ropes courses, search courses, a lot with the task force groups, the GSAR groups here in Georgia, search and rescue. There is a standard, an NFPA standards that provides for that training. Those are specially trained people, and we need to let them do their job. If you don't have that training, don't involve yourself in that because it could take your life. The author ends us in this book and in this chapter talking about the events of 9/11. I remember shortly after that, I was speaking with, he was actually a pastor who had been an engineer. He had an engineering background. And as we were talking about this event, he said in his field that one of the biggest questions that people were asking is, how did this building collapse? Why did this building collapse? Of course, we know that buildings are not meant to have airplanes flown into the side of them. but a building that is built with that magnitude and that out of that, it appears to be that structurally sound. How did this building collapse? And of course, we know now. The North Tower, the report that was issued by NIST, the planes, of course, inflicted structural damage. You know, think about a house with a car that drives into it. You know, there's a lot of structural damage that can be done. Airplane and the World Trade Center. The jet fuel, of course, sprayed everywhere. That ignited the fire and caused the fire to be worse. The fireproofing was dislodged. Any kind of fireproofing on the structure was dislodged by that impact. And so there should be some questions going off in your head that I will mention in just a moment. Open paths for fire spread were available because of the open plans of the floors. They were very open. They didn't have a lot of structural components to make it easy to, you know, move things around and change offices around. Weakened core columns increased the load on the perimeter columns. Sagging of the south floors led to a pull-in forces on the perimeter columns, and then the bowed south perimeter columns had a diminished capacity to carry loads. Those were the results of the NIST research. Now, with the South Tower, there was more direct damage done, which we knew it was more of a direct hit from that airplane. So there was more direct damage done than to the North Tower, which resulted in more severe damage to the center core column, so on the inside of the structure, not just the walls. Again, the jet fuel, the fireproofing was dislodged. They had an ample air supply for the fires that existed. The weakened core columns, like we talked about, the sagging of the floors, and then the perimeter columns there were also bowed. So that helps us understand how this building collapsed. Now, we can very easily say a plane flew into it. That's how it collapsed. And that makes sense. But this is much more, I thought about my pastor friend when I read this, because this is what he needed to know to reckon with it in his world. The author goes on to say that we need to recognize these things that are going wrong. Like, what about fireproofing? What can we do to make fireproofing more stable or permanent on a structure, so that it doesn't, in the event of a collision of some kind, it doesn't disrupt and fall off? What can we do about these open spaces in these buildings? I don't know. But his point is well taken, in that we can study these things from the past, and until we get involved in the forefront of how buildings are being built, we're still going to be reactive. And the fire service has to become involved in, I'm not talking about in, you know, World Trade Center buildings, but in your own community. What corners are being cut? What things are happening? What can you advocate for in your community to increase firefighter safety in a structure that is burned? We can do those things. I know several years ago, when there was a big proponent for, there was a big thing with the ICC about sprinklers. A lot of people, local people, got involved, and they went to Minnesota for the meetings. Sprinklers, advocating for sprinklers in a structure that can hold that fire in check or in bay, so that structural members don't become involved, or at least the main frame of the building is not involved. So we don't learn about building construction just because. It's a selfish reason, I believe. We learn about building construction so that we can identify buildings. We can, not just so we can say, oh, this is a type 5 structure, or this is a type 3, but because what does that mean? What does that mean if I say this is a type 5 structure? What does that say to you as a firefighter? What do I need to do? What do I need to be aware of? How is this fire going to behave in this building? That is why we study building construction. And so when we think about all that we've talked about through this course, lots and lots of material, it all boils down to this last chapter, is that if a building is not stable, we don't need to be inside it. If the, risk a lot to save a lot, I risk a little to save a little, risk nothing to save nothing. So thanks so much. I hope you've enjoyed the course. There'll be an assignment on the course about this on the course site for this particular chapter. I want you to do some kind of critical thinking, reflective thinking. I'll post that, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much. I appreciate you guys.